Hey, Kristen, I wanted to thank you first and foremost for responding back to my initial post. I thought your reply was really comprehensive, and it was clear based on your writing that you have a genuine interest in kind of the same areas that I'm focusing in on with law enforcement, public safety. Um, I kind of wanted to break down what you wrote and respond to each of these points. I thought it was significant about highlighting the stigma with working with this kind of subgroup with police officers and public safety professionals, first responders, because you're exactly right. They are, regularly exposed to these high stress critical incidents, and therefore are going to be more predisposed to developing a PTSD kind of response in the long run to some of these traumas that they go through, quite frankly, on a daily basis. I think that is something, just the sheer volume of traumas that these folks are encountering on a daily basis would probably shock just the average person, because it's not something that we think about. I mean, when you talk about police officers, you think, okay, traffic stops and, random alarm calls sometimes. But there are days when these professionals have 2 to 3, 4, 5 major traumas. They may work a death investigation. They could then be taken to a critical car accident, and then at the same time encounter an armed robbery, all within an 8-hour or 10-hour or 12-hour shift. And so they're encountering multiple scenarios and situations that are high stress, and all of those have a risk factor for PTSD, down the road. So when we talk about law enforcement and prolonged exposure therapy, I appreciated you citing the Becker and colleagues from 2018, the topic on law enforcement preference for PTSD treatment and crisis management alternatives. And I kind of went with that article to find some other relevant literature. I found where that Becker study was cited in a recent article from May 2017 on treating PTSD in active service members using cognitive processing therapy, which is something else that others in the class are studying, or prolonged exposure therapy, both of them showing, wide success with individuals who have PTSD. I think the biggest point that you raised in your reply to me that really stuck out, and I thought it was really significant, was you said using the law enforcement's model of directly approaching danger and working to minimize it seems to be a helpful metaphor to explain the benefits of exposure therapy. I've never seen that brought up anywhere else in the literature, and I think that's a huge and an excellent point, and probably a wonderful strategy that would be interesting to test to see in its use of how well received that is, because you're bridging a real serious gap here, right, that exists within law enforcement and mental health professionals and community, right? You talk about the stigma, but then there's the natural distrust kind of that exists between this population and therapists. And so when you kind of defer to them and you allow them to say, hey, you deal with this all the time when you're going into a situation and you know full well that there's going to be these burdens that you kind of take on, and you're directly exposing yourself to danger. This is somewhat similar to what's going on with prolonged exposure therapy. It kind of is parallel to that in a sense. So there's almost like this mutual respect in a way, because you're recognizing what they're doing in their role daily. Then at the same time, you're incorporating that into the clinical setting. And you're really, at the end of the day, you're developing rapport and trust, which in this community, as you know, is such a huge part, is that you don't want to be viewed as an outsider. You want to be able to kind of talk the talk and know the lingo, because that's a huge part of the overall acceptance. But at the same time, you've got to stress, and there's got to be a clear line of the differentiation in the roles. Because I've noticed when working with these professionals, although you want teamwork and you want cohesion, you also can have disparities in roles when it comes to this. And so I think it's really key that you have to also set the tone by making sure that they understand that your role is the facilitator and as the therapist, and their role is the client. And you do that subtly. I don't think it has to be some over the top, kind of in their face kind of point. But there can be these natural struggles that develop when working with this population that I've noticed that you have to be kind of careful of, and making sure that there is a power shift. Okay, it's not equal power. There is a power shift. And in this case, it's almost like a subordinate, because you're in the role of the primary caregiver there and the therapist, facilitator, and you've got to have that kind of control to be effective in what you're trying to bring about for them. And so I think that's important. And I think, as you highlighted, it's a buy-in for the treatment approach, which I completely agree. So, I mean, all of these studies that you've cited, I'm going back and looking through, but I really wanted to just thank you for being so thorough in your response, and I look forward to replying to your post in the future as well.